Hello, everyone. Welcome to Caves Across Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're here to tell you what to think, how to feel, that you exist. And if you say, well, who are you? Well, who are you? That's the real question.
That's right.
And who are you to tell you that you do or not exist?
That's right.
Right. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to find the basis for why any of us can say really anything. And we're going through James Anderson's book, Why Should I Believe Christianity? And we're kind of right in the middle of it. We just began chapter 4, and we kind of proved God is a necessary being, which means that he must exist.
Right.
And
he's not contingent, even though everything else in existence is, the universe and everything in it is contingent. That is, it's dependent on something else for its existence.
Right.
God isn't.
Right. And that, everything else in the universe is not necessary.
That's right.
So that really makes you feel small in a never small universe. That is until the Pentagon released the alien bodies.
That's right.
We feel even smaller. So we're going to continue.
At least we won't be alone, though.
Yeah. So we're starting off the bat with God and values, and we're kind of a quarter of the way through chapter 4. If you're following along with us, and so hopefully you've picked up the book. It's available in Kindle and in physical form, and all those links are included in the links below. So that's where we're going to start with God and values. So one of the things that we do all the time, usually without thinking it, is to make value judgments. Well, you're just too judgy. Yes, everyone is too judgy.
Too judgmental.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are all judgy, whether we like it or not. We'll think or say that something is good or bad. In extreme cases, we'll even use concepts like perfect. That person is perfect for me. Or that painting is just the perfect representation of classicalism or something.
Yeah.
Or evil. And of course, we in the past 4 years, we haven't heard anything about anything evil or comparison to anything evil. So it's just been hunky-dory recently. So sometimes these judgments are clearly subjective in the sense that it depends on your own personal tastes or preferences. Like, I cannot stand Vernors. I know a Michigander can't stand Vernors. I'm kicked out of the state, but you know what, at this point, Vernors. Is evil to me.
Well, unfortunately, Patrick, that is a personal taste or preference. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here in this particular section of this chapter.
Okay.
Right? Not all value judgments are subjective and person relative, in that way. Some are objective value judgments in the sense that, something like when we make those judgments, we're saying that something is good or bad regardless of what anyone's personal taste is or their preferences or what they think. Right. That's what we're getting at here. Those types of value judgments that are not person related. Yeah. Right.
So the serial killer can have the preference for killing cereal.
Yeah.
I'm assuming Count Chocula and Lucky Charms.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure that's what that means.
That's right.
But
Cocoa Puffs.
But we could say the things that he is doing is evil, regardless of him believing opposite.
Right. So when you kill Count Dracula and Captain Crunch, right? Those are evil, right? Or how about this? The discovery of antibiotics, right? Antibiotics is, we say, is a good thing, right? And we say the Holocaust is a bad thing, right?
We just don't mean, I prefer not to. The Holocaust, I prefer not to.
Yeah.
Penicillin, you know what? I could give or take.
Yeah, right? So indeed, we would even probably say the Holocaust was a supreme evil thing. No thinking person, our author tells us, really believes that, these value judgments are merely matters of personal taste or cultural preference, right? I mean, the Holocaust was bad. Regardless of culture or personal taste. Yeah. Right? It was just evil, period, universally speaking.
And as part of our zeitgeist now, it is cemented as that kind of, at least it's not the Holocaust. That's what we're always comparing it, even though there have been things that have happened that are way worse as terms of bodies or torture experiments or what have you. But, it still sits in our mind that this is going on in the Western world and not some backwater area with the height of a superpower that fell after World War I, rose again, and now carried this out. Yeah, okay, Hitler was a bad guy, but then you
so was Pol Pot,
right?
So was
Mussolini,
Germany, yeah. I mean Russia and China,
right?
I mean, we could go on. 20th century was really a bad time for things happening, right? Being bad.
I mean, you had cultural revolution. I mean, granted, once people thought of World War and then a second one and then the nuclear age, I mean, it just piled on people. And so,
some folks have estimated that over 100 million people were killed during the 20th century. Right? That's a lot of people.
We can do it more efficiently.
The Holocaust was extremely evil. It was bad, but there has been, and there are lots of bad things, right?
And so when you have people in position of power, they might say, oh, what we need is the next, bubonic plague to come in and wipe people out because there's just too many people. Can we say that's good? Can we say that's bad?
Yeah.
What standing do we have to say it's
right.
good
So
or bad?
how do we make those types of judgments, right? Right.
So now what does this have to do with the existence of God? Okay. Here's the argument. Any objective value judgment presupposes, means that it takes for granted, some objective standard or criterion of judgment, some objective standard of goodness by which things can be judged.
So in order to say something is bad, we have to have a standard that we're judging it by, right? And say, based on this, it's bad. We just can't say something, right?
Yeah.
So we have to have a standard.
So
whenever those value judgments presuppose a particular objective standard.
Right. So I draw a circle. It's perfect circle. And you draw a square. And I say, which one is the better circle? Well, yours with the sides. I'm sorry, it doesn't make the cut.
Right.
Mine tries to get as close to that objective standard of a circle, something without sides. Now, granted, I am going to be even more flawed because it's not perfect. It's not drawn by a robot or something along those lines that can get to the micron. The shift of the Earth's axis is off even for that. But we still have this objective standard that we're trying to meet and compare it to.
Right.
And so how does that involve God? But what's more is that the standard has to be also independent of us. It's not just, I drew a circle, therefore you have to match my circle for it to be a perfect circle. Right. Well, no, that's not what a perfect circle is because we don't factor into the definition of a circle at all.
Right. So for instance, let's go back to the Holocaust, right? Well, Hitler might have thought that was good, right? Sure. Everybody else thinks it's evil. So, we have to have an objective standards that goes beyond what individuals think, right? Or even cultures think in order to say that it's truly objective, right? It has to be this independent of us, our personal values and cultural and social values.
Right.
That's the idea of objectivity.
Right.
And furthermore, the objective standard must represent, in this case, for good and bad, pure goodness, right? In other words, in order to say something is evil, we have to have an objective standard that is good, right? It must be absolutely good. Otherwise, it couldn't serve as the final standard of what is good and evil or good and bad. If the standard were absolutely good, if it wasn't that, if it was a mixture, let's say, of good and bad, then there would have to be some higher standard, right, by which we would have to judge that standard, right? And so if we have an ultimate standard, an absolute standard, then it has to be, for instance, in this case, absolutely good. Can't be a mixture of good and bad. Otherwise, it would be something that, how do we know it's bad? Well, we'd have to judge it by something else, right? So it has to be an absolute standard. And so what he's getting at here, he tells us the upshot is that our objective value judgments take for granted that there's some absolute standard or measure of goodness by which everything else can be judged.
Right.
That's what he's getting at. And so that kind of what brings God into the picture here. Right.
And so here's the crucial question. Which worldview makes sense of our objective value judgments? Which worldview is most consistent with our assumptions that some things are objectively good and other things are objectively bad? Things that are the standard is outside of mankind or the universe. As many philosophers have recognized, the naturalist worldview faces real difficulties in these areas, right?
Yeah, it's because if the universe came from nothing and it has no objective meaning or purpose, then what sense does it make to say that, some things in the universe are objectively good or objectively bad, right? If everything reduces to physical particles and forces, then what basis could there be for an objective value judgment, right? What sense does it make to say that, one arrangement, for instance, of physical particles is any better or worse than any other arrangement of physical particles, right?
Right.
If that was just the only thing that we had to look at, right?
Yeah. It's not like this other arrangement of particles. That's what you used to say. You're just then comparing a physical makeup that's right. as a comparison and not even a standard.
Right.
So here's the basic problem for the naturalist, right? If we say that some aspects of the universe are objectively good, like butterflies, for example, chocolate, something like that, and other aspects are objectively bad, diseases, peanuts and ice cream,
holocausts,
along those same lines.
Yeah.
There must be some standard of goodness independent of the universe by which we're judging those different aspects of the universe. And that standard must be pure goodness. There must be that objectiveness. But according to the naturalists, nothing exists except for the universe, right? All that is there is what kind of nature gives us, and you can kind of cut it as saying, whatever does the most benefit or whatever adds to survival, and those things aren't mutually exclusive. But those
benefit and whose survival,
right? And who's standard?
Yeah.
Right? I bring in the old cliche for us presuppositionalists, but by what standard is it tends to be the key question here. So it's precisely this problem that for the naturalists, that nothing exists except the universe, that this problem, which has led many naturalists to deny that our objective value judgments have a meaningful connection with reality.
Right. So especially this was really big in the early 20th century with the logical positivists and so forth. They argued, in fact, David Hume was one of the first ones to kind of put this together, not the first, but he argued that basically our value judgments are based on our emotions, right? It was called emotivism, right? It's what we like or dislike because there was no real objective standard outside of our own personal preferences.
Right. Yeah. So you could have a standard of, I think whatever's most stable for society is good. And so upending slavery would be bad because that would do the most harm to society as a whole. Right. It would upend it. Yeah, it might benefit a few million people. It might drive labor costs through the roof, but then find an equilibrium. It might add to innovation, but that's all. I mean, you're throwing dice in the dark in that period. Yeah. So no to slavery because the highest good is what's best for society.
Yeah. All right. So by whose standard? Yeah, right. And we're back to that. Right.
Right.
So it should be fairly clear that the Christian worldview doesn't face the same problem as having no way to make these types of value judgments. Right. No real ultimate standard. According to the Christian worldview, God is absolutely good, and God exists independently of the universe. Right? So, there is indeed an absolute, ultimate, objective standard of goodness by which things then can be judged to be either good or bad. Right. Because God is that standard from the Christian worldview perspective. Right? So, in short, if something is objectively good, then it reflects the character of God. And it conforms to the will of God. And if something is objectively bad, it is opposed to what is objectively good, which is God, his good character, and his will.
Which is almost what we see revealed in the Bible.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
By my own name I swear, because there's nothing higher. Come let us reason together, because God is a reasoning God. Here's my standard to do this. You fall out of favor, you a drunkard, or in debt or in trouble, and so following God's ways is his standard. Because we live in a fallen world, it doesn't get you out of all the trappings of life, but it's following in what the creator of the universe has created us to be. And so it's like following a train track. Right. If we're staying on the train track, then we're doing what we're supposed to be. We're getting progression down to our final destination. And then to veer off would be to go our own way, and the train is doing what it's not designed to do.
That's right. And so oftentimes, that's the argument people I've heard used why we should be obedient to God, right? It's kind of like the train saying, I want freedom, get me off of this track.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. The train is made for the track, right? And we're made for obedience to God. And so if we try to get off the track, we will become useless, meaningless, and worthless, and purposeless, and all those types of things, right? So the Christian worldview makes sense of the objective value judgments that we make as a matter of routine, right? Including our assumption that such judgments are actually grounded in reality rather than grounded in fiction or our own preferences,
right,
and that sort of thing.
Right? Here's a smart person. I follow after that smart person. Oh, okay. Well, that's just a person you prefer, which is a personal preference. If suddenly that person said something extremely opposite of what you find of value, you might disavow that person. So if that person that really isn't your standard, you're that standard.
Yeah.
There's where the autonomy and theonomy comes into play there.
Mm-hmm.
So the same line of reasoning can be stated in a slightly different way in terms of our concept of perfection.
Okay. So perfection is similar to this objective good or bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So I doubt you believe that the universe is perfect just as it is, right? We're always trying to bend the will of creation. It's trying to kill us, and so we need to stop the forest fires from happening, because forest fires are a bad thing. We're trying to stop disease, or we put up fences so that animals don't kill our animals that feed us. So there's aspects of the universe, of nature, that we view as a bad thing. We shoot asteroids out of the sky, or send drillers up there to blow them up.
That's right.
So imagine you think the universe could be better than it is right now. But if we say that the universe is imperfect, we're assuming there is some standard or criterion of perfection by which the universe can be judged to be less than perfect.
Right.
And that standard must be independent of the universe. It must transcend the universe. It must, be above it. And since the universe is, subject to it. So, what is that standard of perfection? Well, here's where our Sunday school comes into play.
Of course, for the naturalist, there's no meaningful answer to that question, right? Which is why naturalism has to fall back to subjectivism.
Yeah.
Right?
So the universe is expanding, and it could be expanding, contracting for all eternity. There's nothing outside the universe. Expanding into what? I'm not sure, but science will get us there one day. We just need to believe in the science.
That's right. But for the Christian, the answer is obvious. God is the standard of perfection because absolute being is by definition perfect in every respect. So if we deny that God is perfect, we're tactically assuming some other standard of perfection, right? And so such criterion by which we judge God to be less than perfect, in which case that standard is functioning as the real God. Right?
So once again, something we take for granted in our everyday lives drives us to acknowledge the reality of God. Only of the assumption that God exists can we make sense of value judgments we make about ourselves, others, and the universe we inhabit. Oh, that person isn't conforming to my standard. Okay, that person is conforming to their standard. So, what does it matter? Who's to say the standard has the most value? You can look at all the conquerors of the world, and Alexander the Great. Is what he did good or bad? Well, it depends on whose side you're on, right?
If you talk to him, guess what?
Yeah, I mean, the very fact that at 26 he conquers the known world, and meanwhile I'm like trying to find a job, and he's like, you know what, I got this.
Or a diaper.
Yeah.
For my kids. Right. For my kids.
Sure. So, but, did he kill a lot of people? Yes. That person's standard is, I don't want to die to Alexander the Great's troops, yet here we are. We're at an impasse. Who's to say?
Right. Yeah.
So, only on the assumption that God exists can we make sense of the value judgments we make about ourselves, others, and the universe we inhabit.
Right. And so this gets us to kind of so we move kind of values in general to values, a more specific discussion of values in this book, in this next section, right? Mm-hmm. God and morality. Yeah. He says this third argument he wants to offer is really an extension of the one that we've just had. So if you agree that, the most important value judgments we make in life are moral judgments, then now we have the same kind of questions with these kind of judgments, right? We believe that some actions are good and right while others are bad and wrong, and in some cases even wicked or evil actions. And some of these moral judgments are based on subjective taste or personal interest, but many times they aren't. They're objective moral judgments, right?
So when we agree that it's wrong that, of course, what the Nazis did to the Jews or what the Islamic State has done to innocent civilians in Iraq or Syria or vice versa, we don't mean merely that it's wrong for us and by implications not wrong for them.
Right.
It's just, it is.
It's wrong, period.
It's either a statement of fact, like a hospital was bombed by terrorists, but then to say it is wrong that terrorists bombed a hospital is a completely separate question that you're bringing in. So is it wrong? Is it right? Or is it neither? And it's just a fact. So no, we mean that it's morally wrong, period. Right. It's not just a matter of different personal preferences or cultural traditions or whose side of the street you're on or whose finger's on the button. It's just wrong. What these murderous people have done is objectively immoral.
Right. That's the bottom line.
Right.
And so the moment we say objectively wrong, right, the Nazis, what they did was objectively wrong.
Yeah. They ought not to do it. So look out for your oughts and shoulds.
That's right. So the moment we say that, we're assuming that there are moral standards and that, they're objective and absolute, right? We're presupposing there are moral laws which transcend human individuals and our societies as well. And so who or what counts or accounts, we might say, for these moral standards or laws? Where do they come from? Right? What's the source of them? That sort of thing. And so once again, he tells us that this is a glaring problem for the atheists' worldviews like naturalism. According to such worldviews like naturalism, the universe has no ultimate meaning or purpose, right? And so in the end, there is no right or wrong way for the universe to be, right? It's simply what it is, right? And so the only ultimate laws are the laws of physics for the naturalists, but the laws of physics, notice, have nothing to say about morality, right? The laws of physics tell us about how things, we might say, do behave, right? But they don't tell us about how things ought to behave. Right. And so if that's all the laws that we have, or those are the only things that exist in the physical world is the only thing that exists, then we have no ought in that type of naturalistic world. Right.
They're just bodies in motion. That's all
right.
There.
That's right.
So in contrast, though, the Christian worldview makes sense of our moral judgments. There are transcendent moral laws because there is a transcendent moral lawgiver that we derive from that source, and even more so because we're made in the image of that lawmaker. We can reflect and maintain those transcendent moral laws. Moral laws cannot come from an impersonal source. They must come from a personal source. And this is part of William Lane Craig's further unpacking of the Kalam argument, whether God is impersonal or personal. And
you recall also that Mitch Stokes talked about the same thing. You have, in order for morality to exist, you have to have a person, right? Because moral values are personal values,
right? So it must come from a personal source and one with moral authority, so a moral being.
Yeah.
If the universe is God's creation, then God has authority over us. He made us for the purpose, and therefore he has the right to say how we should live. Right. Again, think back to the computer program. The programmer can decide what bits or bytes or parts of the program can interact or carry out whatever job is needed. And so if some level of sentience is done to that computer program, and they go outside the program, or the person who created the code gives it to the code maker to expand upon a secondary line of code, then that person can mess up the code. Syntax error, well, unfortunately, you fell outside the lines of what the code maker had. Let's take it back to the source. Hey, why is this?
Right.
Oh, well, you didn't add a tilde at the beginning. No, it's just HTML coding is one of those things. It's I'm forgetting a slash or a space or an underscore. It's something so good.
Exactly. So the universe is God's creation, and so He's the one that has authority over, right? He has the right to say how it should be done, how we should live, right? God's laws have real, then moral force, but they aren't arbitrary or capricious, because only God commands what is consistent with His perfect love and His goodness and His good purposes for the creation, right? In short, God gives us moral laws for our own good, and they come out of His good character, right? And so they're His, we might say, instructions for us, right? So objective moral judgments then presuppose that there's a God who has given us those moral judgments,
right. And this falls right in line with the God of Judaism and Christianity. It's a God that enters into creation and interacts with His creation, reveals Himself, tells us in which way to stay on the path, and to warn us of what happens when we fall off. And it's a constant, reforming the remnant and continuing on until Christ comes to very much solidify those kind of two worlds of the physical and the spiritual, and really bringing them together.
Right.
Obviously, that's happened a lot more, but in the nature and the person of Christ, it's fully formed out.
So in order to have a even morality to exist, God has to exist, right? We have to have a person who is absolute, and authoritative in order to determine what is ultimately morally right or wrong. We can say, well, each one individually can determine something, but that's not objective, right? It's not independent of us, nor is it based on our culture, because, Nazis. And
all those Nazis always ruining the fun for everyone.
And so, in order to have an objective standard of right and wrong, God has to exist, and so that's the point that he's trying to make here, right? So, in terms of general values, we've seen that God has to exist, and in terms of moral values, he's showed us that God has to exist. Why don't we end it there and then move on to his next argument, we might say, next time.
Right. So next time we'll finish up the chapter. We'll go over reason, the mind, and we'll kind of talk about why.
Yeah.
Why should we care, and how do we care? So as always, we appreciate you checking us out, throwing us likes, sharing this around. Hopefully you've enjoyed what Anderson has brought to the table, and have checked out his links in the description below as well. And hopefully we'll see you back next time so we can talk about more of the mind.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.